Guys, this is the Cartoon History Channel, and this is Saturday Afternoon Retro Tune 18. The influence that 90s cartoons have had on modern cartoons. This 90s cartoon to really truly represent American culture, adult cartoon or not. I mean, it was an adult cartoon, but just cartoon period, was The Simpsons. And that influenced other pushing the envelopes shows like Ren and Stimpy and Rocco and South Park and Family Guy and King of the Hill and MTV Beavis and Butthead. All of the influences that came after The Simpsons came because of The Simpsons. But and another example of 90s stuff influencing other 90s things is other shows of different brands like Nick with Spumco and Ren and Stimpy. They influenced things like Rocco. So everything in the 90s influenced each other. Whereas your adult cartoon future influencee of like that broke off from The Simpsons. There was Mike Judge's Beavis and Butthead on MTV. That broke off into another spin-off show called King of the Hill. And in 1997 till now, for 27 years, we have had Trey Parker and Matt Stone's South Park. And on January 31st, 1999, we had Seth MacFarlane's Family Guy. All of that influenced each other, but in their own market. South Park and Family Guy and King of the Hill were influenced from The Simpsons and MTV's Beavis and Butthead. Two of those shows were created by the same creator, Mike Judge. But the influence, it all goes back to The Simpsons, that first show. Same thing with any genre. If you're talking about Nicktoons, the very first push the envelope show of that kind of adult humor influence was Ren and Stimpy. The second show that wasn't as push the envelope and edgy, but the second show with that kind of influence was Rocko's Modern Life. 90s edge type of humor, at least with Nickelodeon, lasted until the early to mid 2000s. But there were other influences that were positive influences, not just on the comedy, but the way they wrote stories. Like, for instance, disability influence in 90s cartoons in the early 2000s. Like, there was this Nicktoon called Pelswick that lasted for 2 seasons and was about a boy that was a quadriplegic and was in a wheelchair, but he got by and he did everything else that everybody did. For example of how 90s cartoon writing evolved in the 90s, at least with the Nicktoons part of the 90s, was the season 3, episode 13 episode of the Wild Thornberrys called New Territory. It revolves around an episode that at first Eliza is being judgmental towards this CP cerebral palsy girl, but she's being so the cerebral palsy friend is being so like myself and very pridefully independent, trying to do everything on her own. And Eliza, on the other hand, is looking at through her with rose-colored glasses and thinking that she needs help with everything. She doesn't want help with anything, but when Eliza comes to her rescue when she needs it, will she help her or will she just get stuck? She does help her, but only when the character lets her help her. The other show that I mentioned on the adult humor side of things of influence from the 90s is the South Park show started out as just kids being kids when the adults weren't around and being foul-mouthed goofballs. But it has evolved into not only keeping up with major pop culture references, which it has done from the beginning, but it has evolved to be somewhat of a caring show. It's still got the raunch, but it cares and does things about stories that that really make you think. The writing on this show was top notch, and it still is to this day. It stays with whatever is going on in the regular world. South Park, their research and their writing is top notch. Influence from that got us the other show from the very end of the 90s that was an influence of the previous shows that I have mentioned, King of the Hill, and an influence from the previous shows I was mentioning, King of the Hill and South Park, Seth MacFarlane's Family Guy, January 30th, 1st, 1999. It is basically a edgier version of The Simpsons, but it has its own identity. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of the show, does 9 out of 10 of the main male characters. He also is the creative force behind that show and others that came after it, like American Dad and The Cleveland Show. But without him, we also wouldn't have things like Rick and Morty. But Rick and Morty can play its influences on other 90s shows like South Park too. The 90s influences goes back. It will succeed its time 40, 50 years from the 90s. Or even 30 years from the 90s. The 90s influences have helped modern. We wouldn't have modern animation and good adult storytelling without the 90s influence. Two shows that were created by Mike Judge that were in the 90s that were influenced on other shows, but also kind of piggybacked off of each other were MTV's Beavis and Butthead, his original show, that was about two stoning teens. That they don't come out and say that they're stoners, but they're obviously, and they watch MTV, and they're your basic 90s teen losers. There was a character on that show that was spun off into the character Hank Hill. He sold propane and propane accessories, and he evolved into King of the Hill. The same creator, Mike Judge, created that show, King of the Hill. The King of the Hill show is more mature and has more of an actual theme to the stories. The main theme of Beavis and Butthead, aside from the promotional of the videos that they do in the Beavis and Butthead show, was just two slackers sitting around watching Beavis and Butthead, sitting around and watch MTV. The sequel show, King of the Hill, was on Fox, and it had a very more kind of story structure like the South Park episodes or Family Guy or The Simpsons. It was about a man named Hank Hill and his four other friends, Boomhauer, Bill Dauterive, and Dale Gribble, and his family. And Hank was the lead of the show, the moral compass, if you will. They all have redneck tendencies in their personality, but Hank is the moral compass, the do the do what's right person of the bunch. And he frequently has to get his other friends out of messes, Dale and Bill. Next part, I'm going to talk about the anime influence of the 90s. The first show that comes to mind is Dragon Ball. The second show that comes to mind was Sailor Moon. These are both shows that were inspired by manga, the Japanese word for comic. But the biggest influence that influenced, especially on the kid at the time market, was the Japanese anime show The Pokemon, which in modern times, back then and in modern times, you have the show, the game, and the trading card stuff. That is a trademark that started with Pokemon. But because of Pokemon, you had Digimon digital monsters, you had Yu-Gi-Oh, Beyblade, all of those were spiritual successors. It's a completely separate concept of their own thing. But you wouldn't have those other uh, Japanese anime shows without the influence of the 90s Pokemon phenomenon. The Cartoon Network's Toonami originally lasted from 1997 to 2008, but because of the influence in the fan wanting to see it back, it has been on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim since 2012 again, and it's been on there for 12 seasons. That Toonami was a late night influence of its own, of anime cartooning, at least in America. There were three networks that were anime back in the day in the 90s. The WB Kids, Fox Kids, and Cartoon Network. They were the big anime influences in the 90s. They traded ratings and they fought with one another, but because of those either Saturday morning blocks or, in this case, cable channels like Cartoon Network, that's why America has the anime influence that it has today. If you like this video, remember to like, subscribe, and comment, and tell me what you want for the next video in the comments. And remember to hit the bell so you always know about my videos every Friday and Saturday at 3. And if you want more cartoon history, remember I've got a cartoon history TikTok. The link will be in the comments. And I've got 2 Instagrams. The links will also be in the comments. One is called Cartoon History Channel 1 and one is called Cartoon History Channel 2. The one that is dedicated to this channel is Cartoon History Channel 2.